You ever wonder how we got tricked into paying six figures for a piece of paper that doesn't even guarantee a job? College was supposed to be the golden ticket. Instead, it feels like a rigged casino. You walk in at 18, sign your name on loans you don't understand, and walk out 4 years later with a death sentence. And the wild part, it's not even just the debt, it's how it wrecks your credit score, how it follows you like a shadow. Sometimes I think maybe the system was never broken. Maybe it was designed this way, to keep us working, paying, owing, not thinking, just owing. I mean, think about it. The cost of college has gone up by 169% in the last 50 years. Tuition alone can hit $38,000 a year, not even counting rent, food, books, and the occasional mental breakdown in the library bathroom. And here's the kicker. 40% of hiring managers openly admit they avoid hiring recent grads. Like imagine that. You buy the ticket, you take the ride, and the people who told you it was mandatory just shrug and say, yeah, we don't really value that anymore. It's like spending your whole childhood collecting tokens for a prize, and when you finally cash them in, the prize counter is empty except for a half-broken slinky. And yet, we keep doing it, because what else are you supposed to do at 18? I remember filling out my college application while eating cold pizza in my room, headphones blasting some playlist that was supposed to make me productive. I didn't even know what I wanted to study. All I knew was that every adult in my life told me if I didn't go, I'd be a failure. High school counselors, teachers, even family. It wasn't advice, it was an ultimatum, college or nothing. And when you're 17, what choice do you really have? They hand you a pen, they tell you to sign, and you sign. Congratulations, you're now in debt for life. Happy adulthood. Sometimes I wonder if it was always meant to be like this. Like after World War II, the GI Bill made college more accessible. Veterans came back, got funding, and suddenly education wasn't just for the elite anymore. That could have been a turning point, a chance to make education a true public good. But instead, we got Cold War paranoia, propaganda films, and this idea that higher education was some patriotic duty, not just an option, but an obligation. And once you turn something into an obligation, you can monetize it. That's when the scam really got teeth. It reminds me of something Rockefeller supposedly said, I don't want a nation of thinkers. I want a nation of workers. Whether he actually said it or not almost doesn't matter. Because the system works like he did. We're not taught to question the game, we're taught to play it. Go to class, do your homework, chase grades, apply for college, take out loans, get the degree, get the job, buy the house, have kids, retire, die. It's like an assembly line for human lives. And the cruelest part, even when you follow the blueprint exactly, the rewards aren't there anymore. The jobs aren't there, the houses aren't affordable, retirement feels like a punchline. And yet the debt is very, very real. I think about people I know, friends who graduated with 30, 50, even 90,000 in loans. Some of them never even finished their degree, but the debt still followed them home like a stray dog you didn't mean to feed. Interest rates so high that after 2 years of paying $1,500 a month, you still owe more than when you started. Tell me that's not a scam. Tell me that's not predatory. You can't. Because anywhere else in life, when you borrow money, people ask, what are you buying? A car? A house? Equipment for a business? But with student loans, nobody asks what you're buying. Nobody asks if it's worth it. They just hand you the money and hope you never crawl out from under it. And the truth is, most don't. More than 29% of student borrowers are now delinquent. That's not just a statistic. That's millions of people watching their credit scores nosedive. And if you don't know, your credit score is like this invisible gradebook that follows you your entire adult life. Except instead of dictating your GPA, it decides if you get an apartment, if you qualify for a car loan, if you ever own a home, and once it tanks, good luck fixing it. You're not just broke, you're branded. I think that's what eats at me the most. It's not just the money. It's the feeling of being marked, like you failed some test you never even got to study for. Credit scores dropping at the fastest rate since the Great Recession, especially for Gen Z. And we're supposed to just smile, work harder, maybe pick up a side hustle selling Etsy candles or streaming Fortnite and pretend like we're still living the American dream. But the dream is gone. College sold us an upgraded life, and instead we got downgraded futures. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if we ever really had a choice, or if we were just cattle being herded into debt, into cubicles, into quiet desperation. And when I look around, I don't think I'm alone. I think a lot of us are quietly screaming the same thing. College was never for us. It was for them. For the banks, the institutions, the system that profits from our compliance. And when you realize that, the whole thing looks less like education and more like indoctrination, a scam wrapped in a diploma. I keep coming back to this thought. If college really was about education, about preparing us for the world, then why does it feel like the world is crumbling the second we graduate? Like, I don't remember a single class on how to survive rent hikes, or why credit scores exist, or how to navigate a healthcare system that bills you $2,000 for sitting in an ER waiting room. But I sure do remember memorizing the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Useful, right? My credit score will thank me for that one. And credit scores, that's the other half of the trap. Nobody really talks about how much student debt messes with them. Like, you think, okay, I borrowed some money, I'll pay it back eventually, but the system doesn't wait. The system grades you every single month. And if you're late even once, it's like a scarlet letter stamped on your financial record. FICO reported that nearly 30% of borrowers are now marked as delinquent. That's not some small oversight. That's an entire generation being written off as unreliable before we even get a chance to prove ourselves. And you feel it everywhere. You feel it when you apply for an apartment and the landlord gives you that look. You feel it when you try to get a car loan and the interest rate makes you laugh like, oh, you thought you were broke before? Let's see how you feel with 7% interest stacked on top. You feel it when you realize home ownership might never happen, not because you're lazy, not because you don't work hard, but because some number on a screen says you're not worthy. And that number exists because, at 17, you signed a loan you didn't understand. 17, let that sink in. At that age, you can't legally buy alcohol. You can't rent a car. But you can sign a contract worth $100,000, and they call that freedom. They call that adulthood. It's really just entrapment. And the fact that we normalize it, that's the scam. We dress it up in graduation gowns and commencement speeches, but underneath it's just financial chains with a pretty bow. The saddest part is how personal it gets. I know people, good people who did everything right. They studied hard, they went to good schools, they graduated on time, and now they're drowning. One girl I talked to said she owes $9,000 for a degree she doesn't even use. She pays every month religiously, and somehow the balance doesn't go down because interest is the real scam. It's like bailing water out of a sinking boat while someone keeps drilling new holes in the bottom. You work, you pay, and somehow you owe more than you started with. And after a while, it's not even about money anymore. It's about hopelessness. It's about looking at the numbers and realizing you're never catching up. And I get it. Some people argue college isn't a scam because certain jobs require a degree. Doctors, lawyers, engineers. But what about everyone else? What about the millions who got degrees in fields that don't pay enough to even chip away at the debt? What about the fact that half of jobs don't even require a degree, yet we were all told it was non-negotiable? That's not education. That's coercion. That's manipulation. It's like selling bottled air to someone who already breathes for free. You convince them they'll suffocate without it, and then you charge them for life. And maybe this is where the sarcasm creeps in for me, because sometimes I just want to laugh at how absurd it all is. Like, the US student loan debt total is now 1 trillion with a T. That's more than the GDP of 83 countries. Imagine being so deep in debt that you could buy entire nations with the money you owe. And yet, somehow, politicians keep saying the system works. Works for who? Works for the universities that raise tuition every year while paying adjunct professors poverty wages? Works for the banks collecting interest for decades? Works for the politicians who pretend to care every election cycle and then quietly cash donations from the same institutions profiting off the scam? Yeah, it works for them. For us, it's a slow bleed. What kills me is how normalized it all feels. Like, I'll be sitting with friends, and we'll casually joke about our debt like it's a personality trait. Haha, I'm 60K in the hole, pass the nachos. That's how you survive it. You turn it into dark comedy. But deep down, you feel it. The anxiety, the shame, the exhaustion, it eats at you. It follows you. And society looks at you like you failed, like it's your fault you can't climb out of a hole you were pushed into. I once heard someone describe student debt as a life sentence without parole, and that feels about right, because even bankruptcy can't save you. You can file for bankruptcy on credit card debt, on medical debt, but student loans, untouchable. They made sure of that. They wanted to design a system where once you're in, you never get out. And honestly, I don't know what's more depressing, that this is real life, or that we just accept it. Like, shrug, laugh it off, post a meme about it, and keep grinding. Maybe that's why this topic hits me so hard, because underneath the numbers and the policies and the history, there are real people. People who feel trapped. People who feel cheated. People who feel like their entire 20s and maybe their 30s were stolen by a system that promised them freedom. And once you see it that way, it's hard not to call it what it really is. A scam. A scam so big we mistake it for the natural order of things. There's this quote I keep replaying in my head. It's no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. And every time I think about college, about debt, about credit scores, that line just sticks because that's what it feels like we're doing, adjusting. Numbing ourselves to something that should make us furious, laughing it off, calling it just how the system works, when really it's the system showing us its teeth. When you really zoom out, it's not just about college. It's about how education, debt, and labor are all wired together to keep us in place. Like, look at the history. After the GI Bill, there was this wave of hope. More people in school, more access, more opportunity. But then the Cold War hit, and suddenly education wasn't just about learning anymore. It was about national security, about beating the Soviets, about producing workers who could compete in science and industry. Schools stopped being places for curiosity and became factories for productivity. And once you set that precedent, that education isn't about the individual, it's about feeding the machine. It's really not a big leap to where we are now, where universities are less like communities of learning and more like corporations with billion-dollar endowments. And it's not even subtle. Think about Reagan in the 1960s and 70s. He cut public funding for schools, pushed tuition costs higher, and basically said, if you want an education, you can pay for it yourself. And what happened? Protest movements died down. Students stopped being able to take risks. You can't organize or speak out when you're buried under loans. That wasn't an accident. That was strategy. Education went from a public good to a private commodity, and once that switch was flipped, the entire game changed. College stopped being about lifting people up. It became about keeping them down, just polished enough to fill the cubicles, just indebted enough to never leave them. And when you look at it like that, the whole credit score thing makes even more sense. Because what is a credit score really? It's a number that tells the system how obedient you are. Do you pay on time? Do you stay in line? Do you keep the machine fed? If yes, you get rewarded with lower interest rates and the ability to buy slightly nicer cages. If no, you get punished. Locked out of housing, stuck with worse loans, branded as irresponsible even if the truth is you were just broke. And when student debt hits your credit score, it's not just financial, it's psychological. It's the system whispering in your ear, you'll never escape. And man, Gen Z is feeling it hardest. Credit scores for our generation have dropped the most since 2020. And it's not because we're lazy or reckless or whatever narrative older generations love to push. It's because we entered adulthood in a collapsing job market, with rent that feels like robbery, wages that haven't moved in decades, and education costs that have skyrocketed beyond reason. We didn't walk into a fair fight. We walked into a burning building and got blamed for not bringing a fire extinguisher. I think about my parents' generation sometimes. My dad told me once that when he graduated, he had like $2,000 in student loans. $2,000. That's the cost of textbooks now. Adjusted for inflation, it's like $15,000. Still a fraction of what we owe today. He bought a house in his 20s. He supported a family on one income. And then he looks at me, still splitting rent with roommates, still putting off dental care, still juggling debt payments, and he says, well, maybe you should just work harder. And I don't even get mad at him, because for him, that was true. For him, the system rewarded effort. For us, the system punishes us just for existing, and that's the lie nobody wants to admit. College doesn't open doors anymore. It locks you into rooms you never wanted to be in, and when you finally peek outside, you realize the doors were never real in the first place. Just painted illusions designed to funnel you back inside. I remember talking to a friend who refused to pay his loans. Straight up said, nah, I'm not doing it. And he's not alone. About 60% of borrowers are either defaulting, refusing, or falling behind. That's not individual failure. That's a collective refusal. That's a whole generation looking at the bill and saying, this is impossible, this is wrong. And honestly, I respect it. Because how long do you keep playing a game that's rigged? At what point does survival mean walking away? But here's the twisted part. Even if you walk away, the system doesn't. Default wrecks your credit. Wrecked credit wrecks your life. It's like those horror games where no matter where you run, the monster is always 2 steps behind you. And that monster isn't just Sally Mae or Navient or whoever's holding your loans. It's the landlords checking your credit score. It's the employers who use it as a metric for responsibility. It's the banks that slam the door in your face when you ask for help. The debt lives inside every institution like some parasite. You don't just owe money, you owe your freedom. And I think that's the part that keeps me up at night. Not just the numbers, not just the policies, but the realization that maybe we were never supposed to win. That maybe the system was never built for us, but against us. We were told to climb the ladder, but the rungs were greased. And every time we slipped, the blame landed on us. Lazy, entitled, irresponsible. When in reality, we've been carrying weights they never had to lift. So when people say college is a scam, I don't hear it as some edgy slogan. I hear it as a survival scream, a warning, a confession. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you admit it, you can't go back to pretending the system is fine. College is a scam. And calling it that isn't bitterness, it's honesty. The thing about scams is, you only realize you've been conned after it's too late. You're already in too deep, already lost too much, already holding the receipt for something that never worked. And college feels exactly like that. Except instead of one guy tricking you out of a few $100, it's an entire system draining an entire generation for life. And the scam is layered. On the surface, it's the obvious stuff. Tuition prices, loans, interest rates that feel like legal theft. But underneath, it's the promises we swallowed whole. The myth that college equals success. That if you just work hard enough, play by the rules, you'll end up ahead. It's the American dream, upgraded with branding and glossy brochures, and it's all smoke. A magic trick. Because the numbers don't lie. Wages haven't kept up with inflation. Rent keeps climbing. Healthcare keeps draining. And those degrees? They're not ladders anymore. They're shackles. I can't tell you how many nights I've sat there doing the mental math. Like if I cut out coffee, if I cancel every subscription, if I live with 3 roommates until I'm 35, maybe I can scrape together enough to make an extra payment. Maybe then the interest won't swallow me whole, but the numbers never add up. Because the system was never designed for us to win. It was designed for us to serve. That's where Rockefeller's words hit hardest. I don't want a nation of thinkers. I want a nation of workers. Whether he actually said it or not almost doesn't matter, because it's true. We were never trained to think critically about the system. We were trained to accept it. School wasn't about curiosity. It was about obedience. Sit still, raise your hand, follow instructions, and then when you finally graduate, you realize it was all practice for the cubicle. For the clock in, clock out life, for the 9 to 5 grind that drained you just enough to keep you from questioning it. And the cruel part, even when you play along, the system still breaks you, because it's not about rewarding hard work anymore. It's about profit, pure, cold profit. Universities raise tuition not because they have to, but because they can. Banks pile on interest not because it's fair, but because it's legal. Employers demand degrees not because the job requires it, but because it filters out people who couldn't afford to play the game. It's not about education. It's about gatekeeping, about keeping certain people out and keeping the rest in debt long enough to make them compliant. Sometimes I think about the moment I signed my first loan. It didn't feel like a choice. It felt like inevitability, like standing on a conveyor belt that everyone around me was riding, and if I stepped off, I'd be left behind forever. I didn't see the trap. I just saw the ceremony, the applause, the pressure, and maybe that's what makes it such an effective scam. It doesn't look like one. It looks like a milestone. It looks like success until the bills start arriving. And then you feel it in your body, that weight, that constant anxiety that follows you everywhere. It's not just a number on a screen, it's the tightness in your chest when rent's due. It's the sinking feeling when your credit card gets declined. It's the exhaustion of working a job you hate just to pay for an education you don't use. Student debt doesn't just steal your money, it steals your joy, your health, your sense of possibility. And then we wonder why depression, anxiety, burnout are through the roof in our generation. Maybe it's not us that's broken. Maybe it's the system, and yet, somehow, they still call us lazy, entitled, like we just don't want to work. As if we're the problem for not wanting to sacrifice our entire lives for wages that don't even cover the basics. It's insane. Imagine blaming the fish for drowning when you're the one who drained the water from the tank. That's how it feels. Rumors say, well, I paid off my loans. Yeah, because your loans were $2,000 and your rent was $200 a month. Congrats, try doing it now, when the average Gen Z grad owes 30 grand and pays $300 a month just in loan payments, before rent, before groceries, before anything. Try it now, when even the cheapest apartments in most cities cost half your paycheck. It's no wonder so many of us are just opting out, saying screw it, not paying, not playing, because at some point you stop blaming yourself and you start seeing the scam for what it is. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. That's the scary part. Because then every commercial, every politician, every job listing with degree required in the fine print feels like a reminder that the game was fixed before you even sat down to play. And maybe this is where the anger comes in for me. Not just sadness, not just anxiety, but real anger. Because it didn't have to be this way. College could have been affordable. It could have been accessible. It could have been what it pretended to be. A path to knowledge, to growth, to opportunity. But instead, it became a machine. And once you see the machine, once you see the gears grinding you down for profit, it's hard not to feel betrayed. Betrayed by the adults who told us this was the only way. Betrayed by the institutions that sold us hope. Betrayed by a country that called this freedom. The truth is, college was never about us. It was about feeding the system. And the sooner we admit that, the sooner we can stop pretending the scam was ever anything else. Sometimes I wonder what it would feel like if the system actually worked. If education was free, or at least affordable. If you could graduate and actually start your adult life instead of digging out of a financial grave. If your 20s were about learning, exploring, building, not just paying, would people still feel so lost? Would so many of us wake up at 3 a.m. with that quiet panic in our chest? Or would life feel lighter, like it was actually ours to live? Because right now, it doesn't feel like ours. It feels borrowed, leased, like we're renting our lives from banks and landlords, always one missed payment away from collapse. You can't plan a future when your present is drowning. You can't take risks when the floor beneath you is already cracking. And that's the cruelest trick of all. Debt doesn't just take your money. It takes your freedom to imagine something different. It keeps you small, contained, manageable, exactly how they want you. And I don't think it's a coincidence. History shows us this didn't just happen, it was built. Reagan cutting education funding. Universities shifting from public good to private commodity. Politicians propping up a system that manufactures obedience. When you connect the dots, it stops looking like a mistake and starts looking like design. The whole thing reeks of intentionality. Like they wanted a generation of workers who'd be too tired, too anxious, too indebted to ever rebel. And honestly, it worked. I think about how different my parents' 20s look compared to mine. They got married, bought houses, started families. Not because they were better or smarter, but because the system actually allowed it. My generation, we're delaying marriage, skipping kids, living with roommates into our 30s. Not because we don't want those things, but because we can't afford them. Student loans have warped every milestone of adulthood, and we joke about it online, but deep down, it's grief. Grieving a life we thought we'd have, the life we were promised. And yet, I don't feel entirely hopeless. Because here's the thing about scams, once enough people see through them, the power shifts. That's why so many borrowers are refusing to pay. That's why Gen Z is questioning the value of college more than any generation before. That's why conversations like this are even happening. Because for the first time, we're naming it. We're calling it what it is. And once you name something, it loses some of its control. But I'll be honest, most days I don't feel like a revolutionary. Most days I just feel tired, like I'm carrying invisible chains that no one else can see. Like I'm stuck in a loop I never agreed to. Wake up, work, pay, repeat. And in those moments, I try to remind myself I'm not crazy, I'm not lazy, I'm not broken. The system is. And adjusting to it, normalizing it, isn't health. It's surrender. That's why I talk about this stuff out loud, even if it sounds like ranting over old Black Ops gameplay. Because maybe you're listening to this while folding laundry, or commuting, or lying awake in the dark. Maybe you feel the same weight. And if you do, I want you to know it's not just you. It's not some personal failing. It's the water we were all dropped into. And recognizing that, that's the first step to not drowning. I keep coming back to that Krishnamurti quote, it's no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. And man, does it fit. Because if society tells you debt is normal, that suffering is adulthood, that anxiety is just part of the deal, and you accept that, that's not strength, that's sickness. And maybe the healthiest thing we can do is refuse to adjust. Refuse to normalize the scam. And I don't know what the solution looks like. I'm not a politician, I'm not an economist, I'm just some guy talking into a mic at 3 a.m. with a controller in my hand. But I know this, silence keeps the scam alive. Shame keeps it alive. Pretending everything's fine keeps it alive. And if talking about it helps even one person feel less alone, then maybe that's enough. Because here's the truth, we didn't fail, we were failed. By institutions that promised opportunity and delivered chains. By leaders who traded our futures for profit. By a system that confuses obedience with success. And admitting that isn't weakness, it's clarity. So yeah, college is a scam, maybe the biggest one of our generation. And if you're listening to this and nodding along, if you're tired of carrying debt like a second skin, if you've ever felt like the game was rigged from the start, just know you're not crazy. You're not alone. You're seeing it for what it really is. And maybe that's the beginning of something. Not hope exactly, but honesty. And sometimes honesty is enough. Thanks for being here. Even if this was just background noise while you zoned out or tried to fall asleep, it means something to me, and maybe to you too.